You've got a prime minister appointed and then ousted. Another one appointed and they lose a confidence vote. A third one is appointed and they resign within days. No, this isn't some political TV drama. This is what's actually happening in France right now. One of Europe's biggest economies is completely paralyzed, unable to form a stable government or even pass a budget. So what on earth is going on? To really get our heads around this, we're going to break it down into 5 key parts. We'll start with the most obvious symptom, that political revolving door. Then we'll dig into the root cause, a totally fractured parliament, and the frankly brutal economic numbers that are fueling all this chaos. We'll see why nobody can seem to agree on anything, and we'll wrap up by asking a much bigger question. Is this a crisis of the French state itself? All right, first up, let's just look at the most visible sign of this paralysis. I'm talking about the dizzying turnover at the very top of government. It's become a constant cycle of resignations. I mean, the speed of this collapse is just staggering. It all kicks off in September with Michel Barnier. He's appointed, and then almost immediately he's forced out. Then, in November, François Bayrou steps in, but he can't win a confidence vote over his budget. And finally, get this, in December, Sébastien Lecornu is appointed, only to resign just a few days later. This just keeps happening, which begs the question, why? Well, to find the answer, we have to look past the string of prime ministers and rewind to the 2024 legislative elections. Because you see, this problem didn't start in the halls of power. It started at the ballot box. The French voters delivered a parliament that is fundamentally, deeply divided. To put it simply, the election created a hung parliament. In other words, nobody won. See, to govern in France, you need 289 seats in the National Assembly to have a majority. And in 2024, nobody even got close. So right from the get-go, you had political deadlock. And here's what that deadlock actually looks like. The parliament is split into 3 powerful and ideologically opposite blocs. You've got the left-wing New Popular Front, you have President Macron's centrists, and then you have the far-right National Rally. Now, just look at the numbers. It's clear none of these groups can govern on their own. And because their visions for France are so wildly different, they can't seem to govern together either. This is the political quicksand that everything else is sinking into. But, you know, political division is only half the story. The real villain here, the thing that makes any kind of compromise totally impossible, is the budget. So let's take a look at the hard numbers that are really driving this deadlock. First off, the debt. France's public debt is over 110% of its entire yearly economic output. Now, that's not just a statistic. It's a fiscal straitjacket. Any new government that comes in is immediately trapped by this absolute mountain of debt, giving them almost zero room to maneuver. And here's the other side of that same coin. Government spending accounts for a massive 57% of the entire economy. That pays for everything from social security to pensions to a huge public sector. It's one of the highest levels in the developed world. And it creates this enormous public expectation for services that are incredibly expensive to maintain. This chart really puts it into perspective. France's spending isn't just high, it's a major outlier. It's way above the Eurozone average and a full 10 percentage points higher than its neighbor, Germany. So what this tells you is that while the need for spending cuts is economically clear, any attempt to actually make them is met with absolutely ferocious political resistance. Okay, so let's connect the dots here. On one side, you have this hopelessly fractured parliament. On the other, you've got a budget crisis that seems impossible to solve. And that combination creates a massive ideological chasm that no politician so far has been able to cross. And this slide really lays out the core conflict. The left is demanding more spending on public sector salaries, social programs, housing. The right is demanding the complete opposite: fiscal discipline, spending cuts, pension reform. There is just no middle ground here. You can't spend more and spend less at the exact same time. It's that simple. This huge divide leaves President Macron completely trapped with no good options. I mean, what can he do? He can appoint another prime minister, but they're just going to face the same impossible math. He could call new elections, but the polls suggest he'd probably just get the same fractured result again. He could even resign, but that would just create a massive power vacuum. None of these choices actually solves the underlying problem. And make no mistake, this paralysis has serious real-world consequences. The financial markets are getting really nervous, which means bond yields are going up, making it more expensive for France to borrow money. The country's credit rating is at risk of getting downgraded. And on top of all that, France is in danger of breaking EU deficit rules, which could trigger penalties from Brussels. So doing nothing isn't a neutral choice here. It's actively hurting the economy. So what's the big takeaway here? To get one possible answer, let's pull the lens back and look at this through a different framework. Some economists, especially those from the Austrian school, would argue that this isn't just about politics or budgets. They'd say this is a fundamental crisis of the modern state itself. This quote from the economist Ludwig von Mises really gets to the heart of that perspective. The argument, basically, is that government intervention, no matter how good the intentions are, often backfires. It ends up creating new problems that are even worse than the ones it was trying to fix. And from this point of view, France's current mess is the predictable result of decades of exactly that. So from this perspective, the political chaos we're seeing is just a symptom of a much deeper problem, an oversized state. The idea is that when a government makes more promises than it can ever afford and racks up debt it can't manage, the whole system eventually becomes so conflicted that it just breaks down. The political gridlock in France, then, isn't the cause of the problem, it's the inevitable effect. So, what's the solution according to this school of thought? Well, if the problem is that the state has gotten too big, then the only real path to stability is to shrink it. That means limiting the government's role in the economy, putting the brakes on massive debt, and restoring some serious fiscal discipline. It's basically a call for a fundamental rethinking of what the state should and shouldn't do. And that brings us to one last, really important question. France is hardly the only democracy with massive debt and huge spending commitments. So what happens when a country literally can't afford its own promises? If the political class in a major nation like France is unable to agree on a path forward, what does that signal for the future of other democracies that are facing these exact same challenges?